A mad scientist moves to an island where he can conduct experiments without interference.
I understand that I must be shocking to you.
Away from the prying eyes of other people and hidden from government regulation, Dr. Moreau can do whatever he wants. No oversight and no restrictive ethical justifications to his fellow man. He strives to bring humanity and the animal kingdom together, to blend them into something new.
Animals that have been fused with human genes.
His vision was to create a calmer species that was incapable of harm or aggression.
I've almost achieved perfection of a divine creature, absolutely incapable of malice.
His results, however, could not have been more deadly. The hybrid creatures stage a revolt and eat their creator. Today we're going to talk about the insanity surrounding the creation of the island of Dr. Moreau. Then we'll dive into the real-life DNA editing and cross-species experimentation going on in our world today. Links to the topics covered today are included in the video description below. The Island of Dr. Moreau was released in 1996. I'm not gonna lie to you, this movie is a dark, heavy, and sometimes grisly story. It creeped me out as a kid, and as an adult, it still creeps me out. But it's surprising that this movie, over 30 years old, hasn't had a remake. Hollywood will remake just about anything these days. In some cases, to the point of absurdity, like Spider-Man, Batman, or the entire Disney franchise. So why hasn't the Island of Dr. Moreau gotten any attention for 3 decades? Well, it may have something to do with the fact that everybody hated it. Sometimes, if there's too much trouble and drama during a production, a movie gets a bad rep even before it's released in theaters, which hurts ticket sales. The production of The Island of Dr. Moreau, 1996, was so terrible and bizarre and led to such disastrous failure that a documentary was even made about it. In Lost Soul, the doomed journey of Richard Stanley's Island of Dr. Moreau, we learn a lot of crazy details. For one, Richard Stanley heard Marlon Brando didn't like him, so he arranged a meeting. In order to guarantee success, Stanley phoned a buddy of his in England that he would perform a warlock blood ritual on his behalf. It seemed to work, because after the meeting, Brando took a great liking to Stanley and said he would only work on the project if Richard Stanley directed it. But despite this initial miraculous change of opinion, things didn't go so well for Stanley after that, or for anyone else. We could consider this a prime example of why one shouldn't dabble in the occult. It was the beginning of a downward spiral that never ended. Shortly before filming began, Val Kilmer received a notice of divorce from his then wife, and he asked that his role be lessened so that he could spend more time in the States and less time filming in Australia. Even with the reduced role, Kilmer's behavior became aggressive and disruptive throughout filming.
And he was heavy-handed with the Australian crew, which he would loudly denounce at lunch and say that it's the worst crew he'd ever seen and he wanted his American crew.
A big ego and the upheaval in his personal life seemed to be bringing out the worst in Val. Marlon Brando was also in a delicate emotional state, still suffering from the loss of his daughter to suicide in 1995. Brando refused to rehearse and had to be given his lines through an earpiece for the duration of the project.
He never would learn his lines, and he had Carolyn, his assistant, read lines from the trailer into his little earpiece.
And to top it off, Marlon Brando and Val Kilmer did not like each other at all.
Marlon won't come out of his trailer till Val comes out of his trailer.
After only 3 days of production in Australia, director Richard Stanley was fired. Even though it was his own script, Stanley couldn't get his actors to cooperate, he wouldn't come out of the house he was staying in, and progress slowed to a standstill. The studio replaced Stanley with John Frankenheimer, a director with an impressive film resume and a reputation for being a tough, old-school director. Frankenheimer shut down production for a week and had the script rewritten to be less horror and more psychological. He wanted this movie to be more accessible to a wider audience. Less gore, more drama. Frankenheimer still had a tough time of it, and sometimes parts of the script were rewritten to work around problems and idiosyncrasies of the actors, just so progress could be made. The support actors would be in makeup getting ready for 4 hours, and sometimes only be on set for a short time that day doing some actual filming. Sometimes they got nothing done at all. To go through all that preparation and get nothing done some days was frustrating and brought down morale. So the crew started acting a little weird. They were all staying at the same hotel for months on end. Sometimes they partied it up at the hotel, sometimes in the jungle near the set. As boredom and frustration built, behaviors got weirder, And from what the documentary stated, everybody started sleeping with everybody.
They were the hippies. They had dropped out. They were living on the dole. They were living in the woods, just sleeping in the woods. They were all sleeping with each other.
Ironically, the crew became the story, and it was best put with this line from the doc.
They were the island of Dr. Moreau.
Somehow, despite all this madness, Frankenheimer and his group managed to cobble together a story and a movie. All in all, the final product turned out to be dark, heavy, creepy, and the message was kinda garbled. Is it simply about the inherent danger, evil, and confusion of cross-species experimentation, or is it a metaphor about God's creation of mankind and the inevitability of rebellion? It's really hard to say. The plot tries to grapple with the concept of looking for purpose in our existence, the necessity of law to maintain peace, mankind's propensity for violence, the ethics in rebelling against authority figures who use force to maintain order, and whether it's better to pursue lofty ideals or submit to animal instinct. Truly, it's a lot to take in during only 90 minutes. And the last message to the audience was narrated by the main character Douglas, saying that regular people are essentially no better behaved than the animal hybrids were. So hey, remember all that playing God stuff by Dr. Moreau and his exercising absolute control over his creations to the point that they violently rebelled? No big deal, because in the end, people kinda suck anyway.
Stop! Stop! Monsters are people too!
No, they're not. We're barely people ourselves.
What? That message nullifies all previous lessons taught about in the story. As in, there was no point to any of this. Boy, no wonder it didn't resonate with people. The Island of Dr. Moreau 1996 cost about $40 million and earned only $27 million domestically. Worldwide, it earned $49 million, but financially, this wasn't a winner. Even today in 2026, if you check Rotten Tomatoes, it only has a score of 23% from critics and 20% from viewers. That's pretty bad. For my contribution, I give you the 2 plot holes that make the whole movie a big waste of time. Number 1, Dr. Moreau's premise that he's going to make mankind more gentle by mixing in animal DNA makes no sense. He says mankind is violent and angry, so his solution is to mix DNA from animal species whose instinct is to hunt and kill, like that cheetah man or the hyena. If he was going for calm and gentle, he should have done herbivores only. And even then, have you seen the videos of how giraffes and rabbits fight? Even herbivores have a fighting instinct. Number 2, that narration at the end nullified any and all messages previously established by the story. Douglas sails away saying how the behavior he sometimes sees in his fellow man is as unstable as anything Dr. Moreau created. Basically, who cares that Dr. Moreau violated countless ethical boundaries? Who cares that Dr. Moreau established his own colony and ruled over it with absolute authority and gave no freedom to his subjects? Who cares that Moreau failed miserably and never would have been able to accomplish his goal of pacifying human nature? Nah, it's all good, because you know what? Humanity sucks just as bad anyway. The end.
I want to be like you! Will I never be like you?
I hope not.
Instead of the movie actually acting as a warning to those who would recklessly pursue gene-splicing, it ends with a condemnation of regular people. No wonder audiences hated it. The editors might as well have just put a slide saying, "You suck" at the end. However, despite the failings of the film, it brings up an important topic: DNA. In an age where CRISPR exists and the human genome has been mapped out, and international superpowers are competing to see who can create the smartest AI, it seems like this is a relevant time to turn our attention back to the realm of genetics and bioengineering. So let's do that, shall we? Douglas, lost and adrift at sea, washes up on the shore of a mysterious island. Location unknown, but somewhere in the Java Sea between Indonesia and Singapore. He is taken in by the enigmatic Dr. Moreau and his small community comprised of human-animal hybrids. Here's our first lesson today. A true hybrid is an organism whose cells are all of them composed of, in this instance, mixed human-animal DNA. These are not known to exist currently, allegedly. What you'll hear about most often are chimeras, which contain a mix of separate human cells and animal cells. For example, in 2017, Dr. Juan Belmonte and his team at Salk Institute for Biological Studies attempted to use pigs to grow human organs. The motivation was obvious. If we can grow organs on demand, instead of waiting for them to become available by chance, more human lives can be saved with transplants. The altered pigs are considered chimeras because while a hybrid has a perfect blend of DNA from the two species, Being present in every cell, these chimeras are something more like human cell islands spread throughout an animal cell ocean. Since the human cells weren't integrating well enough with pigs, Dr. Juan Belmonte later went on to try again with monkey embryos in 2021 in China. Survival rates were still very low with the monkeys, but higher than with the pigs. In most countries up until recently, chimeras have not been allowed to develop past 14 days, so currently there are no partially or fully grown live chimeras. Allegedly. However, in 2019, Japan overturned its ban on the creation of chimeras and let them grow to maturity, and work began to create mice chimerae capable of growing human organs. In 2020, US scientists created a mouse embryo that was 4% human cells. All indicators point to this type of research being continued. You may remember South Park alluding to this line of experimentation when a mouse is used to grow a body part intended as a transplant for a school teacher, Miss Garrison. That's all I'm going to say about that, but for the morbidly curious, it was Season 12, Episode 5. We know that the scientists are trying to develop these animals to supply humans with organ replacements, but with that knowledge comes an uncomfortable question. Where have we been getting all the organs for transplants up to now? Since artificial organs are not advanced enough yet to be a viable option for things like the heart, lungs, kidney, etc., you have to get real organs from somewhere, and that somewhere is other people. A small percentage comes from living donors, for example, donating a single kidney, a portion of the liver, or bone marrow. The majority of organs, however, come from deceased donors who consented to donation before passing away. If the person was healthy enough at the time of passing, just about any of their organs or tissues can be used as transplant to a living person in need. Okay, so far so good, right? Now, because getting a needed transplant depends entirely on the whims of fate, an individual usually will have no idea if or when an organ will become available. Then another obstacle: will the organ be compatible? Will the blood types match? There are many challenges and variables that come into play. So things can go one of two ways. Either the person in need puts their trust in fate, or if they are wealthy enough, have enough connections to the underworld, and are willing to toss their conscience down a deep, dark mental hole, they can buy an organ outside the legal medical system. This is a dark branch of today's topic, but bear with me because I'm not going to go super deep on the horrors of the underground markets, and all of this is relevant, as you'll soon understand. I'm just giving you a perspective on why some people feel motivated and justified to pursue any and all means of organ production that don't involve regular human beings. So, we gotta mention the international organ trade. Known as the blood market, or simply the red market, people pursuing a needed organ will sometimes travel to other parts of the world in order to participate in what's called transplant tourism. Sometimes this is done in benign ways, such as traveling to get a kidney from a distant relative, but other times the organs come from unwilling victims of kidnapping and human trafficking, prisoners of war, or corrupt hospitals. It's an active issue globally, and it doesn't seem like any country is immune. Even in the US, the number of people who went missing in 2025 alone was 500,000. Out of those, about 300,000 were under the age of 18. That's a sobering thought. Hundreds of thousands of people missing, and 3/5 were underage children. How many fell victim to the red market? We don't know. We may never know the full scale of this madness. So, in light of this, you can see why people would do anything possible to find another way. Something that would eliminate the motivation for these atrocities. Something that could prevent it from ever happening at all. Which leaves the world with two choices. Invest in artificial organs. We're actively working on that already, but we're not there yet. Or grow them in a lab. I apologize for the heaviness of this topic, but now that you are aware of it, doesn't the idea of getting organs from animals seem far less crazy or unethical in comparison? There are many strong reasons for scientists to pursue this route. On the other hand, some people feel that using living animals for any kind of experimentation is immoral. It just goes to show that ethics and gene editing don't go together very easily. Mankind is going to have to continue thinking and debating about these things for a long time. Now, with the ethical dilemmas we've just covered in mind, let's come back to the current reality of human-animal hybrid experiments that we know of, and take it in a slightly different direction. If we can grow organs in a pig, for example, it's much more easily accepted by society than trying to get it from a human. But what if the human is a clone? This is another idea that's been tossed around. What if we just clone people and use the double for parts? Well, if you want an example of how that would work, I'd recommend you watch the 2005 movie The Island. As it illustrates, just growing a brainless clone that doesn't move and feels nothing won't work. The body parts won't be strong and capable because they've never undergone stress and growth like those experienced by an active person. So the cloning company secretly created complete clones and allowed them to live active, healthy lives in an underground facility. When the time of need came for the clients, their doubles were taken and used for transplants. The Island does a great job of demonstrating just how obviously evil it is to grow a fully human clone, only to take its life and use him or her for spare parts. So, clones are out of the question for all countries, for ethical reasons. Allegedly. Then you think, so animals would be needed as hosts for growing the organs. Simple. But not so fast. Isn't there a growing number of people around the world that fight for animal rights? Animal cruelty is a real concern too. And then I remembered something I heard years ago on the Joe Rogan podcast.
Because I want to talk about human-animal hybrids and humanoids. Because, Joe, why has it got to be a humanoid?
Why?
Because if you make it a few percentage points another animal or another creature, it's a gray area. There's no human rights. You have an animal rights movement. You have a human rights movement. There's no alien movement. Right. Aliens are real. They're creating human-animal hybrids that are a new creature, never here on Earth. It's alien.
What am I?
So now what? Are we going to end up with a bunch of Dr. Moreaus? Scientists willing to mix human and animal DNA just so that they can exploit a gray area in the legal system? It's possible, and they'll probably do it in the name of helping humanity, of course.
I don't want to live on this planet anymore.
However, chimeras are not allowed to grow past 14 days in most countries. At least, that's how it used to be. Japan was one of the earliest countries to loosen their restrictions. In 2019, Japan amended its law to allow the creation of chimeras with human brain cells and the subsequent transfer of the resulting creature to an uterus, where it can develop for more than 14 days, eventually until term. Basically, that means they can grow all the chimeras they want, and they'll be allowed to grow into adult, fully formed creatures. All it takes is one domino falling to take the rest down with it. Once one country starts going down the path of reckless scientific experimentation, history tells us the others will compete to get there first, or to do it bigger and better. Just watch the movie The Men Who Stare at Goats, and you'll see the wacky kind of stuff our government did just because they wanted to keep up with Russia. Will this move by Japan ultimately lead to a world full of chimera chaos? Guess we'll see. When I first started researching online for information about chimeras, I was surprised to see that most results were from years ago, and details were somewhat limited. Thanks to that Joe Rogan episode with Alex Jones, I was able to get more specific and track down information on several more examples of real chimeras. Spider goats. They don't swing from a web, but these CRISPR-edited goats do produce silk proteins in their milk. What can you do with this goat silk? Check out this quote from petshun.com. Spider goats are genetically modified goats engineered to produce silk proteins, specifically from spiders, in their milk. This innovative biotechnology combines the strength and flexibility of spider silk with the scalability of goat milk production. By inserting spider silk genes into the goat's DNA, scientists have created animals that secrete these proteins, which can then be extracted and spun into a material known as biosteel. This bioengineered silk is remarkably durable, lightweight, and has potential applications in industries ranging from medicine and military to fashion and aerospace, offering a sustainable alternative to synthetic materials. How else can you respond to that except with, "What?" What's the latest on the goats? Well, it seems that the goats were a good start, but eventually researchers found out it was easier to work with silkworms. Less work, less mess, less goats. Plus, if they were successful in getting the spider silk genes into the silkworms, mass production will be a real possibility. Spider silk has been best up to this point because it's super strong and super elastic. But you can't farm a bunch of spiders. When they're crowded together, spiders tend to eat each other. Very territorial. So by putting the spider silk gene into silkworms, you get the best of both worlds. Cows with human milk. Back in 2011, Chinese researchers had a herd of 300 genetically altered cattle that produced milk that was less like cow milk and more like human breast milk due to the larger quantities of the lysosome protein. The stated goal of these researchers was to reduce the occurrence of malnutrition among the population, especially in children. Nowadays, it seems they ditched the idea of using cows and now focus on manufacturing these proteins in a lab, which is easier and can be greatly scaled up. China does, however, still clone things. Animal clones. For those of you who are old enough, you may remember the big to-do made about Scotland's Dolly the sheep, a cloned animal shown to the public back in 1996. Also the year today's movie about gene-splicing was released, curiously enough. Well, it may interest you to know that China has since cloned the first monkey in 2017 and the first Arctic wolf in 2022. China is currently in the process of cultivating a cloned herd of cows in order to lessen their dependence on imported cattle. These are not examples of chimeras, but it does go to show that cloning and genetic engineering are alive and well.
I am shocked. Shocked! Well, not that shocked.
Organoids. It's not a made-up word. Organoids are, according to an article by the Harvard Stem Cell Institute, tiny, self-organized three-dimensional tissue cultures that are derived from stem cells. To date, researchers have been able to produce organoids that resemble the brain, kidney, lung, intestine, stomach, and liver, and many more are on the way. This way of culturing tissues will give scientists a detailed view of how organs form and grow, providing them with new insights on human development and disease, as well as giving them the opportunity to see how drugs interact with these mini organs, potentially revolutionizing the field of drug discovery and opening new approaches to personalized medicine. If I went up to any regular Joe on the street and asked him if he thought scientists were currently growing mini brains and organs for drug testing, my bet is he'd call me crazy. At best, Joe would act polite and then go on his way believing I'd eaten paint chips as a kid. These are the kind of things going on in the world today, and nobody has a clue. And if we're doing it, just imagine what Russia or China are doing. And speaking of China, in 2019, a scientist named He Jiankui and two of his colleagues were found guilty of illegal medical practices and sentenced to 3 years in prison. What did they do? According to the Chinese court, Jiankui and his co-conspirators forged ethical review documents, used CRISPR technology to edit human embryos so they would be more HIV resistant, and misled participants by not telling them the implanted embryos had been genetically modified. The result was the illegal creation of the world's first genetically edited babies, in this case twin girls. Where are He Jiankui and his colleagues now? Well, I don't know about his collaborators, but as for Jiankui himself, he seems unrepentant about his former actions. While in prison, he wrote an autobiography in which he portrays himself as a great man. He seems to believe he is the next Albert Einstein or Nelson Mandela. He told an interviewer that, "One day I will receive a Nobel Prize." Jiankui stated that his detractors are jealous of his breakthrough.
Has it ever occurred to you might have totally lost your mind?
But while he publicly announced the healthy birth of the twins, he left out that they were both born prematurely and required intensive care. Jiankui promised to support the girls, who are now around 7 years old, if any medical costs resulted from complications of the gene edits. However, he has somewhat shaky finances and is under travel restrictions in China. His visa was revoked, and most scientists and institutions won't work with him. I don't know about you guys, but after reading that article, linked below, it seems to me that Jiankui bears all the hallmarks of being a young Dr. Moreau. Unrepentant, unapologetic, a bloated ego, a disregard for criticism while believing others are just jealous of his genius, a lack of genuine empathy for those he involved. Yeah, sounds like the perfect recipe for a mad scientist. It just goes to show that these kind of men can and do pop up everywhere. There will always be intellectuals who are out to prove their superiority to the rest of the world. Men and women who consider morals, ethics, and safety precautions as nothing more than pesky barriers, holding back their creative genius. Remember, PhD isn't an acronym for Perfectly Humane Doctor. In the wrong brain, those university studies can be tools used to create monsters.
I understand that I must be shocking to you.
What a strange person.
I've almost achieved perfection.
They think their brain's so big.
I got a bad feeling about this.
After researching into the many facets of DNA editing and cross-species experimentation, I get the distinct feeling that there really are islands of Dr. Moreau out there in the world. Isolated locations where madmen toil away to create crimes against nature. Perhaps mankind always engineers its own monsters. Now that we know more about what the mad scientists of the world are capable of today, we can begin to look at history with a new perspective. For example, could the mighty griffin, minotaur, centaur, and chimera of ancient Greece and Rome have been the result of some ancient experimentation, now lost to history? But some of you will say the ancient nations were too primitive. They didn't have the science we have in our modern world.
You sure about that? You sure about that?
Remember that our modern era has grown to what it is after only a few hundred years. The US is only 249 years old.
History began on July 4th, 1776. Everything before that was a mistake.
But seriously, our tech has evolved in a very short amount of time, historically speaking. There have been civilizations that existed thousands of years ago and lasted for longer than 250 years. Do we really think that they were completely incapable of figuring anything out? Or is it more likely that war, natural disaster, greed, and corruption caused the loss of ancient scientific techniques? If you think we're so smart and they were so dumb, why is illiteracy on the rise in the United States? Think about that. What about the legends of mermaids in the sea, harpies in the sky, and satyrs in the forest? What about the half-human, half-animal gods of the Egyptians? What about the Sumerians and Babylonians? In their mythos, the Anunnaki mixed their divine essence, or blood, with clay from Earth to create humans. Was that a metaphor about genetic cross-species manipulation? If you really want to go there, we can do biblical mentions. It's become more and more popular these days to talk about the apocryphal Book of Enoch, which gives an account of extraterrestrial men coming to Earth, taking wives, and producing giants as offspring, also known as Nephilim. Not only that, but during the Watcher's tenure, Genesis 6 in the Bible describes the situation in these words, "And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth." Many people believe that these ancient space travelers, angels, or whatever they were, used their advanced scientific knowledge to manipulate the DNA of almost all humans and animals on our planet. Hence the need for a global reset by the Almighty himself. Could off-worlders have been the first gene-splicers on planet Earth? Were they responsible for the Chimera monsters of ancient myth and legend? So many theories we don't have tangible evidence for, yet. To finish, I'll bring things back to the present. There is so much information about genetic experimentation that it's impossible to include it all without this becoming a full documentary series, so I encourage you to research and see what else you can find. Today we learned that modern scientists are fully capable of cloning animals, mixing human stem cells in animal embryos, using CRISPR to edit human DNA, and that Japan no longer has restrictions on creating human-animal chimerae and letting them grow to maturity. Spider goats, animals used to grow human organs, cows that produce human milk, tiny organs used to test drugs. These things sound crazy enough. But consider this, if these are the things we are allowed to see, what kind of stuff is going on behind locked doors? Or on private islands?